The Smithsonian Faculty Fellowship Program represents a rewarding academic professional development opportunity for faculty at Montgomery College. The fellowships are a product of a unique collaboration between Montgomery College and the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access. It's the first of its kind between the Smithsonian Institution and a community college.
Dr. Cheryl A. Tobler is an adjunct professor of music and teaches world music in the Montgomery Scholars Program. She received bachelor and master's degrees in music and English from James Madison University and was a university fellow while earning her PhD in ethnomusicology at the University of Maryland College Park. Dr. Tobler has presented her research at national and international conferences in Scotland, England, and South Africa, and has been published in journals including the International Council for Traditional Music. Her research interests include Scottish traveler gypsy ballads, Appalachian music, music tourism, and Celtic music. She performs Irish, Scottish, and Appalachian music with several ensembles in Virginia, and has performed overseas in South Korea, Scotland, Germany, and France.
Well, this experience was absolutely wonderful for me. I loved every bit of it, including hearing all these amazing final projects of the fellows I was with at the Smithsonian. This one, I had a bit of a hiccup right when I was going to implement this with the class. The class I was going to use wound up having to be changed. So I have to thank my fellow teachers that I used this course with Mary Fergal and Cliff Collins for it, because they were very kind and flexible and allowed me to change the project over into a course I co-teach with them with the Montgomery Scholars Program. We already intertwined using museum visits into the year-long course, but we were able to add this one into it. It just became a wonderful experience because what we already do is kind of look at subjects from 3 different disciplines: world music, my area, world literature, and also world history. But maybe looking at an event, but from 3 different perspectives: an art perspective, history perspective, literature perspective. So we kind of worked together to see how we could reshape the project to work for this course. And it really did become something I think that worked out better than maybe even my original project would have. We were looking around to try and find an exhibit that involves sound. Which, thank goodness for the Smithsonian, was easier than you would think. There was a wonderful exhibit that just ended at the end of January at the National Museum of African Art. And it was a sound exhibit by Emeka Ogboh. And what he did was record the Lagos market sounds on a typical market day that you would hear. And he incorporated his own composition techniques as well. So it was kind of a unique interwoven sound experience. But also wasn't a typical exhibit. There were really no artifacts to look at. There was nothing in a glass case, for example. You walk into a room and it's quite dim. So I do have a couple of images coming up in a few slides of students in the museum. I try to brighten it as possible. It was a dim, low lighting experience. But the sound was the focus. They did have some ceramic plates on the wall that you would typically see wares being displayed on at the market. But the sound was really from some indistinct speakers in the side. So you really were supposed to be overcome by this soundscape experience. So I wanted to try that actually a little bit here right now too, and hopefully you'll get to hear about 30 seconds of what the students experienced walking into this room. So the students had a chance to hear some of these audio clips before they went to the museum, and I have a quote from one student who was both worried and thought she might be bored to go see an exhibit where it sounded just like sounds and languages she didn't know, sounds of traffic, sounds of sailors hawking the ware at the market. And she had an interesting quote, though, about this in one of the reflection events for this, assignments for this. She says, living in a metropolitan area here in the Montgomery County, I've subconsciously taught myself to ignore background noise. When taking public transportation, I can easily read a book as the person next to me talks on the phone. When I'm talking on the phone, I remain unfazed as people beep their car horns at a driver holding up traffic. I think we can all agree with that. I'm conditioned to block out my surroundings. But she said, but sound, whether it's voices, rhythm, or music, can take people on journeys, though. And so when the students went to the exhibit, they encountered a lot of different reactions to what they were experiencing. And to back up what Alan had just said in his presentation, Virginia, I think, definitely has the standard for using the Learning Lab with the Smithsonian, but I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful experience to kind of interweave information and prepare students for what they see at the exhibits at the various Smithsonians. Alan said even a geologist could create a learning lab. Well, even a musician can do it. And it is a great experience to incorporate that with the visit the students have at the museum. So what we were trying to do, again, I was trying to incorporate this assignment using two other disciplines that were being taught to the same students in the same classroom. So we did do literature involving like Death of the King's Horseman, for example, and other cultures, whether it's West Africa or in other places on the continent of Africa, is especially Igbo and Yoruba culture. And so I pulled out artifacts that related back to some of the historical events we talked about in the course, or musical instruments, or like masks or things that were referenced in the literature, so they could see some of these objects in advance of seeing them in person at the museum. And also the Learning Lab enabled me to include an article, because I knew a lot of students, and most people in general, aren't really familiar with sound art installations at museums. So there was a wonderful article by a British scholar, Robert Warby, called An Introduction to Sound Art. And one of the quick quotes from this that I think was really telling with the students too, he says, it seems the focus on what makes the sound is more important than the sound itself. We think about the guitar, we think about the telephone, but not the sound that's coming from this. And he says, to engage with sound, the work that really needs to be done is the process of listening. So we wanted to incorporate that too with the students who are going into these museums to the sound art, but also we created the project as a twofold project. So my students would go first to the National Museum of African Art, specifically to hear and see, but more importantly hear the Market Symphony exhibit, to really understand what it's like to pay particular attention to the sounds around you. So not just sounds, but the soundscape itself. In addition to seeing other artifacts that you would traditionally associate with going to a museum, you know, the items behind the glass case, in other words. So we went there and had quite an amazing time with it, because the students at first weren't quite sure what to do in the room. We had a wonderful tour of the facility. You can see the students on the left. Two different guides worked with their students and split us into two groups to go throughout the museum and then the exhibit. And on the right-hand side, you can see the room itself. It wasn't quite very large, about half the size of the space that we're in right now. And again, dimly lit, but that was also part of the purpose. To go in, you see the ceramic plates on the wall, but the sound is really coming from the corner, which is kind of a masked white column with a sound speaker about at eye level. But most students didn't realize one of the fantastic things about the exhibit is the chair to sit on, or the platform to sit on in the middle of the room. Because as soon as they sat down, they were under a shower of sound from the way the speaker was set up above them. So once they sat there, not only were they comfortable, but they didn't want to get up because it was a completely new kind of sound experience for them. So they really did quite enjoy being in this environment and seeing sound and what's around them in a different way. One student quoted, "There are always multiple sides to a story. From an individual to a culture, everyone tells them differently. With the Market Symphony exhibit, I found myself closing my eyes and trying to conjure up images for what I was hearing. It also created a more personal connection for me because I wasn't hearing the account from someone else, but rather my own two ears, making me feel like I was the one experiencing the daily life in a Lagos market. So it kind of personalized the experience they're having in the museum rather than being shown something else. They could be more interactive in their own learning and active listening experience to what was going on. So it was a really nice kind of complement to what also we were doing in class from trying to approach a topic from different perspectives. Another student said storytelling is often about perspective. Two people can write about the same event but end up with completely different stories. So again, I mentioned the project was a twofold project. The first part was going as a group and having the tour guide lead us through the museum and talk about the exhibit, and then the students having the chance to experience the Market Symphony exhibit. The second part is something they had to do on their own. They had to find a museum in the DC area to visit on their own, find an exhibit that maybe somehow hopefully involves sound, and sit in that room for 30 minutes by themselves, without other students going with them, without their cell phone being pulled out, and to sit there, take notes about what they're hearing around them. Sound that was part of the exhibit, the comments and what they're hearing people pass by, other visitors to the museum. So not just the sound, but the soundscape also. And a lot of the reflections on this were students thinking, oh my God, I was so bored after 5 minutes. But 10 minutes in, oh my goodness, the conversation I'm hearing here relates back to something I experienced as a child. The people over here were doing this, and the way the sound actually kind of reanimates what I'm seeing on the wall, whether it's artwork, a cloth tapestry hanging, whatever. So it really kind of broadened their perspective of what they're experiencing around them. And there's a few good quotes that came out of this, because at the end they had to write a reflection paper involving both the objects in the learning lab, the article about what is sound art, their experience on the group visit to the African Art Museum, and then their choice of a museum in the DC area. A couple of the quotes here: experiencing museum through sounds opens a gateway to different senses of expression. Another student said, concentrating on sounds distracted me from looking at the plates. However, I think that's the point of the exhibit, for one to close their eyes and make the scene themselves. Really wonderful kind of reflections and critical thinking about what is sound and how does that tell a story and shape people's lives and reflect on a culture and a place. I just want to end with one quote from another student in her final reflection paper. She says, our lives are significantly shaped by the sounds around us, so it is important that stories reflect that. The ability of soundscapes to tell a story raises the question of what is a story. A story isn't just a beginning, middle, and an end. It is something more than that. A story is a glimpse of existence shaped by our senses. Our lives are shaped by multiple elements, therefore our understanding of a story shouldn't be dominated by one single medium, but should take many forms. After all, couldn't a piece of fabric tell a story? Couldn't a smell tell a story? Couldn't a taste? So.